Buenas and Hafa Day. The Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor Procurement, Statistics, Research, and Planning is back from recess. It is now 1:40 p.m., Tuesday, November 29, 2022. In compliance with open government law, notices of today's public hearing was provided via email to senators, stakeholders, and local media on November 18, 2022, and November 27, 2022. I'd like to acknowledge and thank my colleague, Senator Telo Taitigui, who is joining me here today. Thank you. The purpose of today's public hearing is to receive testimony on the following agenda items. Bill number 361-36 COR, sponsored by Senator Sabina Flores Perez, is an act to add a new Article 8 to Chapter 1, Title 22, Guam Administrative Rules and Regulations relative to adopting new source review rule requirements for new and modified major sources in sulfur dioxide non-attainment areas transmitted by the Guam Environmental Protection Agency. The second item on the agenda is Bill number 360-36 COR, sponsored by Senator Sabina Flores Perez, is an act to add new sections 51111A8 and A9 to Article 1, Chapter 51, Division 2, Title 10, Guam Code Annotated, relative to protecting our air, water, land, and the health of our people from toxic exposure due to open burning and open detonation of hazardous waste, and prohibiting the importation and transshipment of hazardous waste into Guam. As a reminder, the rules of conduct for today's hearing is as follows. Individuals testifying shall first be recognized by the chair before speaking and shall begin by stating their name, organization, positions if relevant for record-keeping purposes. Senators will be given an opportunity at the end of each panel to ask questions. Questions and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to character or motive of any senator or individual testifying is not permitted. And now to begin our agenda, Bill number 361-36 COR, sponsored by Senator Sabina Flores Perez, is an act to add a new Article 8 to Chapter 1 of Title 22 Guam Administrative Rules and Regulations relative to adopting new source review requirements for new and modified major sources in sulfur dioxide non-attainment areas transmitted by the Guam Environmental Protection Agency. So Bill 361-36 will adopt rules and regulations that have been promulgated by the Guam Environmental Protection Agency in order to meet the requirements of Part D of the Clean Air Act, in order to align with the regulations of US EPA for the review of new major sources and major source modifications in areas not in compliance with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS for short. NAAQS establishes a criteria for air pollutants such as sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, lead, and particulate matter. Areas that do not meet these standards are designated as non-attainment areas. On Guam, there are two non-attainment areas for sulfur dioxide. The first one is in Cabras. It's approximately 6-kilometer radius area between units 1, 2, 3, and 4 of Guam, of the Cabras station. The second one is centered on the Tengisin power plant, although the plant is no longer in operation. Guam EPA must show attainment of the National Ambient Air Quality Standards for sulfur dioxide within 5 years of an effective designation date by submitting a state implementation plan. In Guam's case, the attainment must be achieved by 2023. To this end, Guam EPA has completed the baseline emissions inventory for 2020. In 2020, the emission inventory for sulfur dioxide was 9,197.04 tons. The estimated emissions inventory for sulfur dioxide in 2023 is 3.336 tons, a reduction of 9,193 tons per year of sulfur dioxide. Once the Guam Power Authority has commissioned the new combined cycle power plant and decommissioned Cabras 1 and 2, Guam will be in full attainment for the 2010 sulfur dioxide NAAQS. Additionally, the adoption of the proposed new source review rule requirements is part of the requirements of the state implementation plan revision. Currently, Guam does not have local rules or regulations for review of new major sources and major modifications in non-attainment areas. And while Guam EPA does administer an approved air pollution program under 40 CFR Part 69, under Part D of the Clean Air Act, Guam is required to promulgate and adopt a new sulfur dioxide major source and major source reduction modification non-attainment area rules. Upon passage of Bill 361-36, the adopted rules and regs would administratively satisfy the following compliance with the U.S. EPA Clean Air Act Part D requirements for non-attainment areas for the 2010 sulfur dioxide National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Number two, adherence to the $3,750 application fee for new major non-attainment area sources and the $1,000 fee for significant modifications to a major source in accordance with 22 GAR, Section 1423C1, D, and F, respectively. And thirdly, it avoids sanctions for failing to attain the 2010 sulfur dioxide National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Letters were sent to the Guam EPA as well as Guam Power Authority, and we have both of those agencies here to present testimony. So at this time, I'd like to invite the person who will testify on behalf of Guam EPA. Is it Roland Gutierrez? Yes, thank you for waiting. You're recognized, Mr. Gutierrez.
Of the 36 Guam Legislature. My name is Roland Gutierrez. I'm the Acting Air and Land Program Administrator for the Guam Environmental Protection Agency, and we're here to provide written testimony in support of Bill 361-36. Guam EPA is committed to protecting human health and the environment. We also strive to improve the health of communities and advancing equity in our environmental protections, working in collaboration with our local, federal, and regional partners. The Guam Environmental Protection Agency supports the passage of Bill 361-36 for the proposed rules and regulations for the requirements for new and modified major sources in sulfur dioxide non-attainment areas, in accordance with 10 GCA 49-49104-0, and is enacted by the passage of Guam Public Law 24-40 on June 30, 1997, and it's amended by Public Law 30-184 on August 24, 2010. The Guam Environmental Protection Agency shall prepare, adopt, promulgate, amend, rescind, repeal, and enforce any other rules as may be necessary to establish additional requirements of the Clean Air Act that are applicable to Guam. The promulgation of these proposed rules and regulations seeks to administratively satisfy the following: compliance with the United States Protection Agency's Clean Air Act Part D requirements for non-attainment areas for the 2010 SO2 National Ambient Air Quality Standards. As said earlier, Senator, adherence to the $3,700 application fee for new major non-attainment areas, sources, and a $1,000 fee for significant modifications to a major non-attainment area source in accordance with 22 GAR 1423 C1, D, and F, respectively, and avoid sanctions for failing to attain the 22 SO2 NACs. At this present time, it said Guam does not have local rules and regulations for the review of new major sources and major source modifications in non-attainment areas. And currently, U.S. EPA conducts all reviews of new major sources or modifications to major sources in attainment and non-attainment areas. Guam EPA administers an approved air pollution control program under 40 CFR Part 49. And as a requirement of the Part D of the Clean Air Act, Guam is required to promulgate a new local SO2 major source or major source modification non-attainment area review rule. The new NAA rule will not increase the cost to the regulated community, as the fees were established by Guam Public Law 24-40 on June 20, 1997. These proposed regulations will meet the requirements of Part D of the Clean Air Act and will align the Guam EPA regulations with federal regulations. Respectively, Walter S. Leon Guerrero.
All right, thank you, Roland. If you could just stay, if we have questions for later.
Sure.
I'd like to invite Trustee Lim Tiaco to present testimony on behalf of GPA. Trustee, you're recognized at this time.
Half a day, Senator Perez. My name is Tracy Lim Tiaco. I'm the Assistant General Manager of Administration for the Guam Power Authority. I am here to read in testimony from our General Manager, Mr. John M. Benavente, PE. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony in support of Bill 361-36. 36, relative to adopting new source review requirements for the new and modified major sources in sulfur dioxide, non-attainment areas transmitted by the Guam Environmental Protection Agency. The Guam Power Authority, as a major source of air emissions, has made it a priority to comply with the Environmental Protection Agency's air regulations and air emission requirements, with the exception of the 2 sulfur dioxide non-attainment areas around the PD Cabras area and the Tanguisan power plant, which is currently no longer in operation. Guam has met the national ambient air quality standards. The authority has taken necessary steps to reduce emissions and to ensure compliance with the NAAQS. These include the conversion of PD 8 and 9 power plants from residual fuel oil to ultra-low sulfur diesel, and the conversion of Cabras 1 and 2 from 2% RFO to 0.2% RFO. The PD 8 and 9 conversion has already been completed, and the Cabras 1 and 2 plants will be converted to 0.2% RFO by January 1, 2023. Additionally, Cabras 1 and 2 will eventually be retired once the Ukuru power plant has been commissioned. The revision of the state implementation plan is a key component in meeting air emission standards. The rules and requirements for the Guam Air Pollution Control Standards and Regulations and the new source review requirements for new and modified major sources in SO2 non-attainment areas have been made clear throughout Bill 361-36. The authority believes that the adoption of this bill is crucial to meet air quality standards that will benefit the environment and health and welfare of the people of Guam. And I appreciate and thank the body for the opportunity to present this testimony in favor of Bill 361-36.
All right, thank you so much, Mrs. Limtiaco. Is there anyone else here to testify on behalf of Bill 361-36? Okay, if I can invite Guam EPA and GPA to the table for questions. Okay.
Senator, before we begin, may I ask our subject matter experts to come join us?
Of course.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
please.
you. One of you guys can-
Okay, and if you can state your name.
Good afternoon. My name is Roger Pabunan. I am engineer supervisor with the Guam Power Authority with the section under the section Planning and Regulatory. We are the environmental compliance section for the authority.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Okay, so a couple questions just for the listening audience. So basically, these rules and regs are required to comply with the Clean Air Act. Currently, Roland, is US EPA in charge of implementing this part currently?
So as part of the non-attainment area rules for the 2010 NAAQS, each of the local jurisdictions must now promulgate their own rules to enforce these regulations. And the regulations are a requirement of any jurisdiction that does not have attainment for the 2010 National Ambient Air Quality Standards.
All right, thank you. And currently, is there any applicant that is looking to license a major source or major modification?
No, we've not had a major source put into service or commission since, I believe, 1972. And in conjunction with discussions with the Guam Power Authority, they don't intend to build any new major sources in any non-attainment areas. The current combined cycle power plant is going to be a minor source plant, which has an enforceable emission limit of less than 100 tons per year, and that's in the Tanguisan 1971 non-attainment area.
And so to be considered a major source, you'll be emitting more than 100 tons
Correct.
of a pollutant. In this case, it's sulfur dioxide.
In this case, it's sulfur dioxide, but any pollutant cannot be over 100 tons. So it doesn't matter if it's nitrogen dioxide or carbon monoxide. If it's in a non-attainment area, then nothing can be more than 100 tons, or it would be considered a major source.
Okay. And is Guam in attainment for the other criteria pollutants?
Yes.
Okay. As does the baseline, the one that was done in 2020, does that outline that, or is it just specific for sulfur dioxide?
That's specific to sulfur dioxide. Guam EPA still has and is working at completing an entire emission inventory for all the national ambient air quality standards for all of the criteria pollutants.
Okay, and when is that due to be completed?
We're working on it.
Okay.
There's 2 staff in my office, me and one other person.
Okay, and as far as the greenhouse gases, is that considered a criteria pollutant?
Right now, since Trump, there was going to be a major push for greenhouse gas emissions and regulation. However, that was pushed out when President Trump came on and has not been put back in effect, to my knowledge.
Okay. Will Guam EPA consider that as one measure, one that they're going to include in this upcoming study for criteria pollutants, considering that that could be potentially put back in? Is that something under consideration?
Well, we'd have to create a strategy to monitor that. So basically what we do is we monitor all of the significant emission sources, which are over 2 tons per year for the entire island. And what we'll do is we have all the annual emission factors that need to be submitted from each of them. That's how we create the emission inventory for Guam, and that includes also mobile and non-mobile sources. And then we basically extrapolate that through a formula for all of the mobile and non-mobile sources that aren't required to submit annual emission information. So we would have to look into how we would track greenhouse gases.
Okay. And so are we on track to being in compliance with the national ambient air quality standards for sulfur dioxide?
Yes, we are. As soon as, as part of the GPA's consent decree, and in conjunction with the non-attainment standard, they had to submit calculations that would show that they would meet the standard. And so as the assistant general manager stated, they're now going to convert to, is it 2%? 0.2, which is 200 parts per million, by 2,000 parts per million by January 1st. And so the deadline for conversion is, the last date is December 31st of this year.
Okay. And in order to be compliant, what level of, do we have to fall below?
Well, it's in my emission inventories. I don't remember it off the hand, but we do have the emission standard in our emission inventory that I submitted to your office.
Okay.
I don't remember it off the top of my head. It's
Okay.
probably, it's below I believe it's below 1 ton of sulfur dioxide for that area. And then there is a plan that we're going to implement along with GPA to begin ambient air monitoring of that area. And we're working on completing that plan and that project.
Okay. And so these new rules that are that was promulgated by Guam EPA, that's now encased in Bill 361, can you explain what is going to ensure that attainment is maintained? So what sort of
That was the whole impetus of the bill. So basically, in order for you to go over the national standard, there would either have to be a major source that was put in place, and that major source, through the different testings and actual analyses that they'd have to do, they'd have to show that they wouldn't go above that standard. Prior to us issuing any type of permit or any type of boots on the ground for digging or anything, they would have to complete all that analyses. And once those analyses were completed and approved by not only us, but by also US EPA, because US EPA has primacy over the Clean Air Act, that's the only time they would ever be allowed to do it. So as we discussed previously, Senator, it is a rigorous and arduous process. And as I said, there's not been a major source built on Guam since 1972.
Yes, if you can explain, because if it's a major source, it's producing over 100 tons.
Correct.
But yet we still have to reach attainment, which is down to 1 ton, you said?
Well, it's 100 tons of criteria pollutants. So with the use of ultra-low sulfur diesel and the decommissioning of Cabras 1 and 2 once the combined cycle power plant, then all the modeling that we've done, along with GPAs, contractors, and ourselves, and the approval of US EPA for our modeling protocol, it shows that we are in attainment. The only other way to prove attainment is to actually do the actual ambient air monitoring. So what we've done in conjunction with GPAs, we've done modeling, and that's modeling has been approved by US EPA.
Okay, I guess the question is, though, if this is a rule that is required by the Clean Air Act, but yet we're in the process of trying to get attainment, is EPA, can there be a licensing of such a utility or plant if it's going to produce amounts of contaminants that can go the opposite direction of reaching attainment?
No. So there would never be a permit issued to anybody who would even come close to an enforceable emission limit. So basically when they say an enforceable emission limit, that's 100 tons, we never reach that limit. So what it is, and that, as I explained, all the new power plants have several controls in place, and they're called continuous emission monitors. And so basically it's tracking the emissions of that pollutant coming out of the stack. It's like every minute. And so once it reaches over a certain limit, the plant is shut down, and then the maintenance has to be done to correct that problem. And then through the years, we have an enforceable emission limit that is below the standard. So they'll never get to 100. It'll always be 95 and below. There's always a factor that's in there, in place as a cushion to ensure they don't go over the emission limit.
So do you see it as a possibility that there can be a major source that's permitted and still be within attainment?
I don't foresee anybody going through the process of putting in a major source. The only major source that we have on the island is GPA. Every other source is a minor source.
Okay, I think those are my questions for now. Senator Tadekwe, do you have any questions for EPA or GPA?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to everyone today. The rules and regs that we have before us, this is for EPA. Half a day, Mr. Gutierrez.
Hello, Senator.
Happy holidays to you
Same
and the
to
family. These rules and regulations that are in front of us, was this part of the March 10th? No, when was it? Did you have a public hearing on any of these rules and regs?
Yes, we did.
Okay, can you get the dates? I think was August 5th or May 26th that ring a bell, or September 22nd or October 5th?
I don't remember the exact date, but I had submitted the complete packet to the legislature with the AG's approval, the governor's approval, the public hearing dates and notes, and also the public hearing transcript.
Yeah, it was on May 26th, I believe. The Attorney General approved them on August 5th, and the governor issued her approval on September 22nd, 2022. And the proposed rules and regulations were officially transmitted to the legislature on October 5th, which we're here today to go through. During the public hearings on these rules and regs, can you kind of tell me some of the comments that were being made or some concerns that were brought up? And
Nope.
How many people showed up?
0 people showed up.
Figured. Well, I think we attributed to that, to a bill that I introduced in the 30th Guam legislature to require ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel on this island back in 2009. So we were kind of ahead of the game when it came to looking at our island as being in compliant with air emissions and, trying to go into a more friendly environment when it comes to used oil, et cetera, down the line. So I'm glad, you followed all the guidelines to move forward, and now it's in front of us today. This is a requirement. If these rules and regulations get through, is there the possibility of EPA receiving any kind of funding once this is approved?
I don't have the exact figures, but we are majority funded through U.S. EPA
Right.
and through our program fees. I don't believe there'll be any additional funding to conduct this, but we do have a lot of technical assistance and a lot of help from U.S. EPA Region 9 for technical advice and for review and analysis of these processes.
I believe something like $20 million is a number that comes to light with if these rules and regs are not adopted, that you may lose some of this $20 million. I think it was
Right.
something
I actually submitted an addendum to the testimony that we submitted earlier, and I have the
Yeah.
figures in front of me.
Yeah. Can you
And-
explain?
Yeah, so the Section 30 federal highway funds, if these rules aren't passed, will be withheld from the government of Guam until the SIP and the SIP maintenance plan and the SIP rules and regulations are passed. So this year, the federal highway funds for 2022 was $16,795,054, and the projected for 2023 is $17,032,024, and for 2024 it's $17,336,039.
So it's important
Significant sanctions.
significant amount. So to get these rules and regulations passed as soon as possible, is there a deadline that you showed us how much we could lose if we don't get these passed, but what is the deadline?
But the deadline for us to get to attainment is 2023.
So next
And
year?
so
yeah.
this coming year, if we don't do anything,
Is it by
we will be-
January
Well,
2023?
I think was by October,
Okay.
October
so-
19th.
Okay, we can breathe
But
a
there's
little bit.
there's
but-
other items that need to be accomplished in order, not just the bill,
Yep.
but also the actual SIP update that we need to do. And once the bill is passed, then we package that along with the modeling protocol, the emission inventory, and the other requirements for the SIP package. And it has to go out to public comment once again for a 30-day public comment period. And if there's no significant comments and it's approved by the governor, then we submit it to the United States EPA for approval.
There are about 6 requirements, correct? Are we talking about the 6 requirements?
The SIP, the State Implementation Plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you for following these guidelines. They're put in place to get public input, and since nobody showed up, I guess there's no concerns, but this is an opportunity for us to get this bill on the session floor and probably bring up more questions.
Sure, I'm available to answer any questions that you have.
As always, thank you so much,
You're
and I
welcome.
appreciate it. Thank you so much for GPA as well. Thank you.
Right. I guess thank you so much, Senator Tadegui. I have no further questions at this point, but thank you for your testimony today. And so this bill 361-36 is duly heard. We will still be accepting testimonies until Thursday at 4 p.m. All right, thank you. Okay, now we're moving to the next item of the agenda, Bill 360-36 COR, sponsored by Senator Sabina Flores Perez. It's an act to add new sections 51111A8 and A9 to Article 1, Chapter 51, Division 2, Title 10, Guam Code Annotated, relative to protecting our air, water, land, and the health of our people from the toxic exposure due to open burning, open detonation of hazardous waste, and prohibiting the importation and transshipment of hazardous waste into Guam. So now for an opening statement. Bill 360-36 is an act to protect our people and natural resources from toxic exposure to hazardous waste by prohibiting the practice of open burning and detonation, or OBOD for short, as well as transshipment and importation of hazardous waste into Guam. OBOD was prohibited in the 1980s by the U.S. Congress, with the exception of waste explosives, which could, according to the military at the time, could not be safely disposed of through other modes of treatment pursuant to 40 CFR Section 265.32. Over the past 4 decades, major technological advancements have been made which can replace OBOD, and it can result in lower emissions, less environmental and public health impacts, and is more monitorable and acceptable to the public. Further to this point, a 2018 study by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine stated, quote, "There are no significant technical, safety, or regulatory barriers to the full-scale deployment of alternative technologies for the demilitarization of the vast majority of conventional waste munitions, bulk energetics, and associated waste," end quote. Despite the vast amount of data linking OBOD to the emission of hazardous chemicals and the resultant impacts on communities of color and other minorities, as well as the well-documented public outcry against its practice in the continental U.S., our island, especially inhabitants of our two most populated villages of Jigo and Dedido, as well as military personnel and their families, face the threat of toxic exposure with the recent recent application of the Andersen Air Force Base to conduct OBOD at Taragi Beach. The most vulnerable population will be those are children, adults who already suffer from pre-existing heart and lung conditions. It is also important to know that cancer is among the leading causes of mortality on Guam, and many of our people suffer from comorbidities. Open burn, open detonation will release a multitude of highly carcinogenic substances, pollutants, pyrotechnics, cancer-causing substances such as lead, dioxin, Teflon, Viton, and PFAS, or forever chemicals, which are highly resistant to natural decomposition and burning. These are only a fraction of toxins our community would be exposed to through active open burning and detonation, unless it is prohibited. Bill 360 would also add sections 11A8 prohibiting the importation and transshipment of hazardous waste into Guam. Given Guam's delicate ecosystem and the recent efforts by our community and government to preserve our environment, this helps to ensure the preservation of our natural resources and the health of our people by refusing the added burdens of transforming our island into a refuge for hazardous waste disposal. Currently in statute, there is no requirement for the Guam Customs and Quarantine to track the importation of hazardous waste, and the inclusion of this measure would help clarify the protocol for instances in which the importation of hazardous waste may occur. And any person who violates this prohibition will be subject to fines in section 51115C. Communities throughout the world are becoming increasingly aware of the risk of damage to human health and the environment caused by the transboundary movement of hazardous waste. It is a growing threat posed by increased generation and complexity. Realizing our island's limited capability to manage hazardous waste generated in other places, it is important that we are prudent and clear when making decisions that will affect the future generations of our island and prohibit the importation and transshipment of hazardous waste into Guam. For the record, letters were sent to Guam EPA, BSP, Customs and Quarantine, Department of Public Health, Office of Veteran Affairs, inviting them to provide testimony. We have received written testimony from several community members. At this time, Sarah Martinez Floriano, Kenneth Mondino, Callan Perez. And so now I would like to open the floor for testimony. So we will go in order by the sign-in sheet. So I'd like to invite Victoria Lola Leon Guerrero, Guam EPA. So we have Walter Leon Guerrero, but I guess in his place, Roland Gutierrez, Monica Flores, Dr. Michael Bavacqua, and if there's anyone else that I haven't called that would like to provide testimony, feel free to come to the table. All right, so I'd like to now acknowledge Victoria Lola Liangorel to provide her testimony.
Hafaday, Sizos Maasi, Senator Sabina Perez for introducing this bill, and Hafaday Senator Telu Taidagwe, thank you so much for being here to listen to these important testimonies. I am absolutely opposed to open burn, open detonation in our island. We've really reached a point where enough is enough in terms of environmental contamination. As an unincorporated territory, our island has been subjected to centuries of colonialism, which has involved centuries of war and war games that involve very toxic waste that have contributed to very high cancer rates that our community continues to suffer from. One of the biggest obstacles to this situation is our lack of sovereignty and voice and ability to prevent this. We don't fully know the types of chemicals that have already been buried and left in our environment, nor are we properly informed about the kinds of toxic chemicals that are being burned in our environment. Whether or not these incidences occur on or off military installations, they seep into our water, they contaminate our air, they contaminate our food sources, and they are killing our people slowly. I think that enough is enough, and I commend you for introducing this bill. I fully support this bill, and I am absolutely opposed to the continuation of open burn, open detonation in our community. I think at the heart of this issue, we also need to look at how we enforce this. Our island needs more support for our Environmental Protection Agency. We need to look at stricter penalties for environmental contamination and things like open burning and open detonation. What will be the penalty, and how do we enforce that? How do we also ensure that there are no exemptions given to the Department of Defense? These are things that concern me because historically they've been able to evade local laws in order to continue these very dangerous practices that are harming the health and well-being of our community. And so those are some questions that I pose. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I just want to encourage our leaders to continue on a path to fight for self-determination so that we can achieve the sovereignty necessary to prevent the biggest culprit on our island in terms of contaminating our environment, the Department of Defense, from continuing these terrible practices.
All right, Zuz Masi. Thank you so much, Victoria. Okay, now I'd like to recognize Guam EPA, Roland Gutierrez, to provide testimony on behalf of the agency.
Have a day, Madam Chairman and Senator Taidagwe. Thank you for allowing us to provide testimony on the bill today. So Guam EPA is committed to protecting human health and the environment. We also strive to improve the health of communities and advancing equity and environmental protections, working in collaboration with our local, federal, and regional partners. In recent months, community groups have raised concerns to Guam EPA about operating open burn, open detonation units, and exposure to contaminants from plumes of smoke or deposited onto soil or leached into the groundwater. Guam EPA recognizes the public's important role in the permitting process and has provided opportunities over the last 36 years for public input during public comment and response periods and public hearings where citizens, permit applicants, and regulators can engage in a dialogue to ensure protectiveness and transparency. Because of the potential hazards to human health and the environment, in 1980, U.S. EPA banned open burning, including open detonation of hazardous waste at interim status facilities, with one exception. EPA allowed OBOD for waste explosives which cannot safely be disposed of through other modes of treatment. Waste explosives, as defined in 40 CFR 265.382, include waste which has the potential to detonate and bulk military propellants which cannot safely be disposed of through other modes of treatment. Waste explosives are characteristic for reactivity under 40 CFR 261.23A 6 to 8.6. Example waste explosives include military munitions, explosive, guns, and rocket propellants. Examples are RDX, HMX, IMK, and TNT, and perchlorate, fireworks, and flares. In 1987, US EPA finalized permitting standards for hazardous waste management units that were not already covered in the regulations, including OBOD at 40 CFR Part 264 Subpart X. Under miscellaneous units. Under Subpart X, a miscellaneous unit must be located, designed, oh my goodness, I need a better copy here. Excuse me for 1 second, Senator. My copy is not very... Other provisions to protect human health and the environment, including but not limited to appropriate design and operating requirements, detection and monitoring requirements, and requirements for response to releases of hazardous waste or hazardous constituents from the unit, found at 40 CFR 264.601. In the 1987 final rule, US EPA used 40 CFR 265.382's definition of waste explosives to explain what OBOD operations could and could not be permitted under Subpart X. Specifically, EPA listed OBOD of explosive waste as an example unit covered under Subpart X, referring to units as defined in Section 265.382. US EPA also concluded in the 1987 final rule that open burning of non-explosive waste could not be considered in a manner that was protective of human health and the environment, reinforcing their findings in the 1980 ban on open burning of non-explosive hazardous waste, found at 40 CFR 265.382. Based on this guidance, Guam EPA has followed the Subpart X regulations, which states that permits for such miscellaneous units must contain such terms and provisions as are necessary to protect human health and the environment, found at 40 CFR 264.601, and permitting authorities generally incorporate applicable provisions from the existing EPA regulations. Guam EPA integrates the most stringent of regulatory requirements. OBOD units must be designed to protect human health and the environment. Any permits issued to OBOD facilities must include conditions that protect the health of communities. This includes protective distance requirements, limits on duration and timing of OBOD events, monitoring environmental media, engineering controls to reduce off-site impacts to communities, and noise and vibration thresholds. These conditions, among many others, are and have been included in past and current permits Guam EPA has issued to Andersen Air Force Base OBOD facility. As a fail-safe, RCRA Section 3005C3 stipulates that the U.S. EPA administrator or authorized state can review and modify a permit at any time during its term in accordance with this direction. At 40 CFR 270.41A2 authorizes regional, state, and territorial permitting authorities to modify or revoke and reissue a permit based on information that was not available at the time of permit issuance and would have justified the application of different permit conditions at the time of issuance. We want to reiterate that Guam EPA recognizes that OBOD is generally the least environmentally preferred treatment technology for waste explosive and consistent with existing requirements should only be used where there are no other safe modes of treatment. Both US EPA and Guam EPA acknowledge that OBOD, while being the least preferred technology, will still be needed to treat waste explosives that do not have other safe modes of treatment. Most recently, on June 7, 2022, Carolyn Hoskinson, Director of the Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery, issued a memorandum to Land, Chemical, and Redevelopment Division Directors in Regions 1 through 10 for the purpose of communicating existing requirements on the designation of OBODs under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act to protect human health and the environment. In short, the guidance for existing requirements for permitting OBOD units is that open burning of hazardous waste, including open destination, is currently prohibited under RCRA except for open burning and open destination of waste explosive, as defined in 40 CFR 265.382. Facilities subject to this requirement must demonstrate that their waste explosives cannot be safely disposed of through other modes of treatment to qualify for the exception and use OBOD. The facility must successfully demonstrate through an evaluation of alternative technologies that there are no other technologies that can safely treat each waste stream. As new technologies become available, a facility must periodically reevaluate whether this condition has been met to maintain compliance with this requirement. Periodic reevaluation is required even if the facility has previously made this evaluation to satisfy its interim status obligations under 40 CFR 265.382 or to satisfy a permit condition established under Subpart X. Additionally, as stated in US EPA's 2019 report, Safety has historically been cited as a primary reason for using OBOD. For the Department of Defense, among the many factors in choosing an alternative technology in place of OBOD is whether the technology meets safety mandates. According to DoD, OBOD limits the handling of excess munitions and explosive, helping to protect local residents and employees from injury, death, or damage due to explosive safety risks. DoD's Explosive Safety Board is responsible for determining whether a technology meets safety mandates for specific or munition-specific application. Guam EPA will not dispute DoD's safety determination in the handling of unstable waste materials, such as unusable World War II munitions and explosive materials, and will continue to work with the operators of the OBOD unit to minimize waste generation and reduce waste being open burned, open detonated through appropriate engineering controls and measures to prevent and minimize surface, subsurface, and groundwater contamination and aerial dispersion and release or migration of residues, kick-out, and contaminants into the environment and off-site. And in regards to the importation and transshipment of hazardous waste, the Hazardous Waste Management Program monitors and ensures compliance of all activities related to the generation, transportation, treatment, storage, or disposal of hazardous waste, underground storage tanks, emergency response, polychlorinated biphenyls, and assessment and mitigation of inactive or abandoned sites impacted by hazardous waste and regulated substance as to prevent the present and future threat to human health and the environment. The program carries out a proper management of hazardous waste through the Solid and Hazardous Waste Management and Litter Control Act, Title 10, Guam Code Annotated, Chapter 51, and Guam Hazardous Waste Management Regulations. Moreover, it was given federal authorization in 1981 via the Government of Guam's official request to implement a locally administered hazardous waste program to enforce the Federal Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, Subtitle C, and in accordance with Part 4N, adopts by reference 40 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 260.60A of Guam's Hazardous Waste Management Regulations. And any person who imports hazardous waste into Guam from a foreign source must comply with the requirements of this part and special requirements of the parts that we have attached herein. And thank you for allowing us the testimony on this bill, Senators. We appreciate the forum for your understanding.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gutierrez. Next on the list is Monica Flores.
That was a long mouthful.
Sorry, there we go. Hafa Senator Perez and Senator Taitigui, thank you both so much for being here today. I sort of anticipated seeing more senators here since this is such an important community issue. Just really excited that and grateful that this is a bill. This is something that is pretty substantial. It's more than words. It's more than symbolism. It is actually looking at how Guam is able to administer the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act that Mr. Gutierrez was talking about, and add to how we're able to administer it and to enhance our authority, actually. So I'm really excited. I'm really excited that this is calling for a ban on open burning. And it was a little unclear to me what Guam EPA's position was. Thank you for Guam EPA for discussing the recent memo, the how open burn, open detonation, permitting and management is supposed to look like on paper, which is really different from, what happens on the ground. And in a lot of communities where open burning and open detonation takes place. As you mentioned earlier, Senator, open burning and open detonation 80% of it takes place in communities of lower economic income status and communities of color. This is environmental racism. And not only should open burn and open detonation not take place at Andersen Air Force Base, it shouldn't take place anywhere here on the island. There's way too much at stake. And actually, I've submitted a few slides and a few videos that I'd like to officially enter into the record and share publicly. And so if I can ask for the technical support to play, actually, if they could play one of the videos, and I can speak to one of the videos. So this video was actually taken at the shore of Taragi Beach. So this was just the day before our hearing at the district court I took the Earth Justice attorneys to my family's property at Anapsan and also to Taragi, which is also ancestral land in my family, to show them, the areas of impact of the OBOD range. And as we were standing there, this massive cloud of pink smoke starts to rise up. I can't describe the shock, the timing of it all. To literally be standing there with our attorneys from Earth Justice and seeing this massive cloud of pink smoke rise up from the jungle, over the cliff, and all the way onto the plateau. Now, we can just take a second to take a look at this. The video actually doesn't do it justice to the density of the color and the size of the cloud. And shortly after this, a gray cloud also rose from the jungle. It was quite shocking to see the spread of that smoke and imagining it going to the villages, of Dedido and Jigo, to the surrounding jungles, to all the ranches and farms in that area, the schools, the daycares, and all the people who are fishing in that area. As Victoria Lola Leon mentioned earlier, this area doesn't just affect this area because of the way smoke travels in lands, in our jungles, and on our soil. These chemicals, have a far-reaching impact. Can I go ahead and ask for the next video to come up? So the next video we actually found on YouTube, and this is a clip. We're gonna mute the audio for copyright issues, but we also edited this video for brevity and for appropriate content for today's hearing. But this video is actually quite disturbing. Oh, sorry? We're not going to show that video? Okay, sorry, we're not going to show that video. Okay, well, I encourage everybody to then look at our social media where we've shared this video. And this video is quite shocking. It actually shows open detonation that happened here in 1993. Not only shocking, there's so many shocking things about that video. You can hear the explosions. You could see these massive clouds of gray smoke. In one of the shots in the video, there are dolphins swimming and jumping out of the water, chasing mahi-mahi. And there are airmen talking about the dolphins and laughing as one explosion, as one bomb explodes. And what you sense after that are these tremors, these really strong ground tremors that come several minutes after that explosion. But the worst thing, probably the worst thing about this video is the laughing. The laughing, the joy of this desecration of our environment and of this sacred land. And Guam EPA has a sacred responsibility to protect the land and the people of Guam. And they have the authority to deny a permit that's sitting in front of them right now that's actually in violation of the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, as well as the National Environmental Policy Act. And also kind of goes against a recent memo, as Mr. Gutierrez spoke of earlier, that actually informs how permitting agencies go about approving or denying permits. And there's so many things missing. They did not, in that permit application that Andersen Air Force Base submitted, they did not do an assessment of alternatives. They did not do a human health and environmental impact assessment. And they did not do a good job. They didn't do anything to engage with the community. All of these are requirements of both of those federal policies that they have violated in their application. And furthermore, in violation of this very recent memo from US EPA. Can I go ahead and cue up the slides then, please? Since we're not showing that video, it's okay. You can see it on all of our social media. So again, it's so important to measure this action against a long legacy of environmental racism. We have over 100 military toxic waste sites, 19 Superfund sites, several generations now suffering from cancers and other illness resulting from nuclear radiation, Agent Orange exposure, PCBs, and other contaminants. Very recently, we had 500 tons of contaminated soil from a jet fuel leak. And as you know, we always find unexploded ordnance. These are just some of the examples of the destruction and the degradation of our environment from, American colonization. Can we go ahead and go to the next slide, please? I wanted to show this image here of where the OBOD range on Andersen Air Force Base is located right now, because as you can see, it's right next to the shore. And we actually got to take a boat out there one day It's a very rich fishing area, and to be really close to the OBOD site and see it from the water, to see the size of it, it's quite disturbing. And if you were to watch that video, like I said, you would have seen chunks of those explosive devices flying up into the air and also out over the water. And you can see why, because it's literally right on the shore. And it's also very close to the area, the recreational area of the military, occupied beach park at Taragi Beach. And I can actually tell you that even from Anapsen, from my own family's ranch, standing at the shore, I can see the OBOD site. So the area of impact, it's actually quite small. They only, give it like a 2,400-foot safety zone, and you can see from those clouds the impact goes a lot further than that size. Can we go ahead and next slide, please? I wanted to show this slide because these images are from the permit application, by the way, the Anderson Air Force Base's permit application. So the open burn and open detonation units, these numbers, SP5, 4, 2, and 1, are actually freshwater seeps where, the fresh water comes from the limestone and out into the shore. So this is exactly how those contaminants travel in the air, to our coastline, and in the groundwater. And this is, again, just one example. This is just one site of open burn, open detonation here on our island, where they want to blow up 40,000 pounds of munitions every year. Can I go to the next slide, please? I thought it was important to share this. I shared this in the last public hearing where I testified or provided testimony. The EOD range is actually really close to Northwest Field. So we have 2 sites of contamination at the northern ends of the island, both of them with tremendous risk. The firing range over our aquifer and the EOD range at the other side. And so it's almost as if the northern end of the island is sort of destined to become a sacrifice zone. And of course, none of us want to see that for our island. And I think those are all the slides that I had to share. But I think those are all the slides I had to share. Yeah, thank you. So my name is Monica Flores. I'm from Brasilia, Texan, Saver Tidian, and we're here today to support Bill 360-36. And again, we just really want to thank the senator. We actually didn't know when we formed 5 years ago that we were going to get involved in this issue. We were really looking at the firing range, and in 2017, those 2 studies from the Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the National Academy of Sciences weren't available to say that there are alternatives. And we didn't even, at that time, we weren't aware that Anderson Air Force Base was applying for a permit even then to do open detonation at the time. They haven't done open burning in a long time, but now they want to bring it back. But my point being is this permit renewal came up and we didn't know about it. It was something that kind of fell under the radar for not just Brasilia, Texan, Saver Tidian, but for the whole community. And it wasn't until Senator Perez actually had an informational briefing last October, so just a little over a year ago, to bring this permit application to the public. And if it wasn't for that hearing or informational briefing, we wouldn't have had a chance to provide public comment on that permit application. And again, I would just want to say publicly, we oppose the permit application. And we hope that Guam EPA will deny that permit as it violates those 2 policies as well as the recent U.S. EPA memo. We've worked really hard in just the last year. We've engaged in a lawsuit represented by Earth Justice. We're working on several other strategies, and we're just really excited with this bill because it gives us hope, and it puts the power back. It gives power back to the people, and I think. That concludes my testimony. But I've also been asked to read on behalf of Barbara Beneventi, who wanted me to read her comments into the record.
Okay, yes, that's acceptable.
Okay, thank you. Dear Senator Sabina Perez and other members of the 36th Guam Legislature, my name is Barbara Bobby San Nicolas Beneventi, and I wish to provide written testimony in support of Bill 360-36 relative to protecting our air, water, land, and the health of our people. Oh. I'm sorry, just a second. This printout that was provided is cut off. Let me pull it up on my phone. Okay. Relative to protecting our air, water, land, and the health of our people from toxic exposure due to open burning and open detonation of hazardous waste, and prohibiting the importation and transshipment of hazardous waste into Guam. My husband Peter and I have lived in Guam, Dedido, for over 60 years and have been farming our property in Jigo diligently in the more recent 15 years since my husband's retirement from the government of Guam, and then my retirement as well in 2015. Guam is home and has been for close to 70 years. And has been for close to 70 years. We have 3 children, 6 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. Although we both worked for Gov Guam well into our eligibility for retirement, we still lived lives that include subsistence fishing and farming, a way of life we learned and valued from our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. We in turn now teach important life skills in farming and caring for our land and environment to our children's children. In fact, our youngest child, Piper, who is 5 years old, proudly harvested her first pumpkins for the seed she planted earlier this year. Our other grandchild, Madison, who is 11 years old, is known for her ephit seeds planting, and to include calamansi, avocado, and mango seeds. My husband has been fishing for over 50 years, since he was about 12 years old. As a civilian non-military family, we have invested in the purchase of boats in order to access the fishing areas near Latexan and Taragi. His love of fishing equaled his love and commitment to providing fish, healthy seafood for his family, neighbors, and friends to enjoy. Throughout the 48 years of our marriage, I witnessed the time, energy, and sacrifices he makes to prepare and maintain his fishing equipment, boat, and trailer. I've listened to his many accounts of his adventures in the open ocean and along the ocean reef in northern Guam. Stories that included a time when he was outside the reef fishing and was startled by a loud explosion he heard coming from the direction of Taragi Beach, and then saw black smoke rise from the ground and up into the air. He told me that really took him by surprise, and he wasn't quite sure what to make of it. I've shared this story with the Guam Environmental Protection Agency during its October 2022 board meeting. It was then that I and several other community members voiced our concerns and requested that Guam EPA deny the U.S. Air Force's permit application to continue open burn and open detonation operations in Guam. OBOD operations present significant threats to the health and safety of our families and our island community then, and it does now. It without a doubt does harm to our land, water, air, and sea, and inevitably the well-being of our people. During the recent GIPA board meeting, we were adamant that OBOD practices cease immediately. We requested that GIPA not grant a permit for the U.S. Air Force to continue to open burn and open detonate hazardous waste munitions on Taragi Beach or on any other land beach spaces in Guam. It is imperative that we, as stewards of our land and protectors of our environmental resources, do all that is within our power to ensure that our younger generation and future generations live their lives in a healthy environment without contaminants and toxicity that most certainly will be present if OBOD operations are condoned. For the sake of our families and yours and the generations to come, I ask you members of the 36th Guam Legislature to pass into law Bill number 360-36. Respectfully, Barbara Bobby S.N. Beneventi. And Senators, if I could just add also, just listening to Auntie Bobby's recounting her husband's story of being out on a boat and fishing and not having any information about that explosion going off. That pink cloud of smoke that we saw, we asked fishers if they received any notice of those activities, and they told us that they did not. They also told us, that they have been finding fish in that area that has some weird tumors in them. Another issue I wanted, that Auntie Bobby's testimony reminds me to bring up is also, the issue of transshipment that this bill introduces and adds to the current law, and we support that decision. If you look at this permit application from Anderson Air Force Base, it discusses that explosives and hazardous waste will be transported from other locations and disposed of on that OBOD range. And so again, this is not something we want. We don't want Guam to become this destination for hazardous waste for the rest of the region. And so again, you know, we support a ban for open burn and open detonation for Guam. We do not want this to happen at Taragi Beach, not just for, you know, in hopes that one day that land could be returned to the families who lost it, but for all of us, because nowhere in Guam should an OBOD range occur over an aquifer. Nowhere in Guam should it occur near any residences. It shouldn't even exist here at all. So thank you so much for this opportunity to present testimony today. And again, we encourage all the senators to vote in favor and pass Bill 360-36. Thank you so much.
Sujus Masi Moneka for your testimony and continued advocacy. So I'd like to call upon Dr. Babakwa for his testimony.
Buenas and hafade. Nui do Senadora Guini, gestige fogna haani, Piot Hago, Senadora Sabina Perez, nitumugi za umen entrega estina bill. Nanhu si Michael Luan Babakwa, matsotsugi miseon guahan, dan unu nagehilu pari netnon comunidad independent guahan. Laguini pago gi menan midzo tiu quantu sisidzi adzusia, tumestitigo zu guini pago, como un sumoro, dan un tautau guahan, isti hagas ma koloninisa na tanota. Husa popoti esti ma proponi na Bill 360-36, ni parutsoma esti na babad and govnadan yosun actividad, open pit burnings and detonation, da humudzonya u protehi gwenahata naturat siha. Kada dia man mafananago ifamagun gi eskuelan guahan, paru meresada I inafresi. Man mafananago siya gi halami kwatoniha, na guaha gi lenat lata, guahaguini gi tanota, ni titulai kadzon, ti debidi o nafalingu, ti debidi on bendi, ti debidi on lastima, debidi on protehi, za debidi on defendi lokwe. Ni na hudzongi ina fresigini ni kanainya za ni hinasonya si Dr. Bennett Dunka, guida tumugi logi minagahe tadongnya I haletnya estina espiritu kinu I hinasun unu hana tautau. Tahungo kesti na finadzigi na nesti senangani manam kulokwe, I salapi on sosoda on zuzuti lo unuha I tanokmo. I inafresi mo na hahasui man hobenta kada diha puresti. Na I hano mi airi I tano I kultura I lenguahi I hinengi todo esti sia mo na posisibli le nat laguini za rume persesenta I spiritun esti na lugar lokwe. Kada unu na patgon guinigid za guahan hatungo I mensahinya I inafresi. Hafibalinya parehita como un filosofia. Lo kota uusa estina tenadong gitaimano ta famatintinas laisia ta decidi mohon ta decidi mo na hafa menaulek pari komunidad ahi. Lo sinyata tu laika na udidi di estina bill jan otro na bill taguini. Sinyata tu laika adumididi ilai jan reglamento guini gitanota esta ki undi hamohon u atsilong jan espiritu ni inafresi. Hunggan para hafati tapuni na guaha undong kulunya na problema kinuesti I estauta politikat. Fihu manai podet hit guini gi mismu tanota kolonia man samoru. Man tai diretsu todo guini lo man latai diretsu I samoru sa ti man ma recognize lokui I diretso niha como I man natibo parestina tono. Lo estina na masina minagahit pari estauta tisinya ta accepta na un rason na mismu taza ni na sinyata. Guaha dikiki lo gof bali na pineka ni sinyatatsuli taiguini ko sakit sinyatsonek tati adzuna fuetza siha ni dumestrotrosa I tanota za fumufuna si diretso ni tauta. Gifenakpo husopopote estina builds and taimanu ha adzuda hit muna aadza taimanu magubetno estina isla zan espiritun zan hinengin samoro ni hagas gumigiha I talanya motna. Hu agradece estina tsansa para bai husangani hamzu ni hinasokusia sidus masi.
Sujus Masi, Dr. Babakwa. Next on our list is Leroy Moore. You're recognized for your testimony.
Hello, Senators. My name is Leroy Moore, and I am President of Unitech Environmental Guam. Unitech Environmental Guam has been performing environmental services for the island of Guam since 1988. Our firm annually packages, transports, and disposes of millions of pounds of hazardous and non-hazardous waste from Guam and neighboring islands to properly permitted disposal sites in the United States mainland. Unitech Environmental Guam also performs unexploded ordnance and munitions and explosives of concern investigations. Our firm also maintains a U.S. federal explosive license for the manufacture and use of explosives. As an industry expert, I propose B360 be withdrawn and not voted on committee for passage into law. Regretfully, since I became aware of Bill 360, I've not had the time to go into extensive detail why this bill should be withdrawn and not voted on committee. However, I have prepared a brief response in opposition to this bill. The beginning content of the bill regarding environmental and health hazards associated with explosives and hazardous waste is purposely written to frighten the reader regarding the danger of these items. The layperson knows that there are dangers with unexploded ordnance and hazardous waste. This is not in question. However, what the layman may not know is that both unexploded ordnance and hazardous waste are highly regulated by U.S. federal government, Guam Code Annotated, international regulations through both country and UN regulations. My firm exists to help generators of hazardous and non-hazardous waste properly store, package, transport, and recycle or dispose of their waste in an environmentally safe manner and in accordance with the litany of laws governing these materials. I would hope that prior to drafting legislation regarding hazardous waste and explosives, that the author of the proposed legislation would take the time to meet with industry and regulatory officials prior to bringing the legislation forward. These are complex subjects that are highly regulated and not simple. When this research is performed, this makes for good laws, realistic outcomes with proposed legislation. Based on my discussion with industry and regulatory personnel, this research was not performed for Bill 360. As written, B360 adds to Title 10, Division 2, Chapter 51, Prohibited Solid Waste Activities, A8, it is unlawful to import or transship hazardous waste into Guam, and A9, it is unlawful to use open burn, open detonation for treatment of hazardous waste. By adding these two items to Guam Code Annotated, the legislation will significantly damage the environment of other Pacific islands and put lives at risk with unexploded ordnance and munitions and explosives of concern. I will first address A8, import or transshipment of hazardous waste into Guam. We live in a connected world. Islands in the Pacific, however, have limited transportation options. Guam prides itself in being the transportation hub for Pacific islands. The islands of the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Rota have their ocean freight routed through Guam. The islands of the Federated States of Micronesia, Yap, Ponape, Chuuk, Coast Rai, also have their ocean freight routed through Guam, as do the Republic of Marshall Islands, Kwajalein, Ebi, and Majuro. Additionally, Diego Garcia, Wake, and Midway Island also occasionally have ocean services routed through Guam. Like Guam, these islands do not have the ability to perform treatment and disposal of hazardous waste generated on their islands. Like Guam, hazardous waste generated must be transported to locations where proper treatment and disposal can be performed. As Guam is the transportation hub for these islands, Bill 360 thereby prevents our island neighbors from properly handling and disposing of their hazardous waste, as Bill 360 makes it unlawful to transship into Guam. Transshipment of hazardous waste into Guam does not present a threat to Guam's environment, as Guam is not the final destination for disposal of hazardous waste. The hazardous waste generated by our island neighbors is transshipped to other locations where proper disposal can be performed. However, the waste must transship through Guam to reach the disposal destinations, as Guam is the transportation hub. The Department of Defense maintains facilities in Wake, Midway, and Kwajalein to defend the United States. Maintaining of these facilities often generates hazardous waste. This waste is required by U.S. law to be properly disposed at a U.S.-approved facility. Again, to reach these facilities, the waste must go through Guam. What does Bill 360 tell our island neighbors? Sorry, your waste can't pass through Guam. We realize you have no other options. Hopefully when it leaks into your environment, the damage won't be too bad. Regarding A9, it is unlawful to use open burn, open detonation for treatment of hazardous waste. I assume that this proposed legislation is using the term hazardous waste in A9 as the regulatory definition under US EPA regulations for explosives. There are currently multiple federal and local rules and regulations governing handling of explosives that limit the options for treatment and disposal of explosives. The U.S. military on Guam currently has permitted facilities for detonation and open burning of explosives. Making these activities unlawful will result in direct harm to the residents of Guam. The island of Guam was a battle zone during World War II. Unexploded ordnance is still found to this day throughout the island. Currently, the U.S. military provides supports to the resident of Guam when unexploded ordnance is found outside the fence. When a UXO item is found, military EOD personnel remove the item and take it to the military's range for open detonation under emergency response rules. This activity will stop if Bill 360 is passed into law. The military's permanent ranges have limited explosive weights that can be brought to the range. Once the explosive weight is reached, no further explosives can be brought to the range. If Bill 360 becomes law, found unexploded ordnance on civilian and government Guam land will have to remain where it is found, threatening the safety of the people of Guam for an uncontrolled detonation. There is no civilian option available for these items. The U.S. military is performing the largest cleanup of World War II munitions and explosives of concern in Guam as part of military construction activities. This entails the military actively investigating project sites for World War II era UXO and MEC. Again, as the permanent ranges on Guam for open detonation have limited explosive weights, the range will very quickly fill the capacity if open detonation is made unlawful. With no ability to properly store and dispose of the explosives found, the military's construction activities will grind to a halt, impacting the economy of Guam, as well as the safety and the well-being of our service members and our nation. Guam's military ranges are not the same as detonation burn activities performed by the military in combat zones. Guam's ranges are highly regulated. The regulations are extensive and include what material can be detonated and what explosives can undergo under open burning. These ranges will undergo extensive cleanup once the facilities are closed. As the date of this hearing, the military continues to research a best available technology to replace detonation and open burning. These treatment technologies include incineration and chemical treatment. Universally, communities do not want an incinerator built or permitted. There are experimental chemical treatment options for these waste explosives. However, these treatment options are not considered industry standard, and the chemical treatment generates hazardous waste during treatment. If incineration or chemical treatment is proposed, a U.S. EPA and Guam EPA permitted hazardous waste treatment facility permit would be required to conduct the treatment. With today's social condition where not in my backyard is the rule, it would take 10 to 20 years to obtain a permit if possible. However, the need to address these materials remains a now problem, where we have a solution until a better solution can be found. Accordingly, for the reasons stated and many more, I ask this governing body to withdraw this legislation. There are direct negative effects to the people of Guam and our island neighbors should this legislation be passed. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Moore. We now have Talia Meno. No, Maveni Hasita. Micah Mallon. Okay, Taylor Page, again.
Okay. Buenas and half a day. Guahusi Taylor Page again. Si Zus Maasi, Senator Perez and Senator Tello for being here today and listening to our concerns. I just want to start off. I'm a member of the GCC Eco Warriors, also Pertahila Texan, and I am the coach of the George Washington High School Rugby. And the reason why I'm saying I'm the head coach of the rugby team is because that is our future generation. Is if open bomb and burn detonation is foregoing on our island, if the firing range is foregoing on our island, then it's going to contaminate our future generation. How will our athletes and just, again, our future generation have their basic necessities, their basic rights in order to have their cognitive skills thinking? Also, that goes in correlation to the younger generation, because having lead contamination will include damage to the brain and nervous systems, and it will slow the growth and development going into cognitive and learning and behavior problems, and then hearing and speech problems. So I'm here to support Bill 360-36. As Maneka said earlier, the video that she was not able to showcase, I saw that last semester when I was at GCC in Mrs. Kerr's class. She brought to surface the tragedy of the open bomb and burn detonation, the battle that we won last year in fall 2020. And then now it's here again. And I believe this shouldn't even be happening here. This should, as Maneka said, everybody else has said, it shouldn't be happening anywhere else. Because this affects not only the Tautau, but it also affects our Tanos and Tausi. It affects all the organisms that live with us, that coincide with us. It's not just us that live here. It is not just us. We have to take into account for the animals, the marine life, the biodiversity, who cannot speak. And then you can see with the mass pollution of green gas emissions over time, from when I was younger to now, I can see in our Tumon Preserve how our biodiversity has diminished over the past 19 years. You can see all the pollution on our island and how it just pretty much affects. It's here, it's right in front of our eyes, and we cannot keep ignoring it. We cannot allow us to turn a blank face and pretty much ignore the issue. And then also Maneka brought to surface again, brought to light the 15 tons of contaminated soil from one recent jet fuel leak. You can also see that it's not only happening, this environmental racism is not only happening on our island. It is happening in Hawaii. You can see that with Red Hill. It's just, the signs are there. We cannot keep ignoring it. It's not happening on Guahan. This is not happening here. This is happening everywhere else, and it's time that the people come together and we finally stand up and fight for what is right, because our ancestors long ago, Tautau, they do not want us to live and inhale these bombs. They don't want to have us. I'm pretty sure they're crying right now at the fact that we're fighting an open bomb and open detonation. We're fighting a firing range that's going to affect the necessities for living, our basic rights as humans in order to grow and function. But overall, we have been resilient. You can see that with Pertahila Texan, with Maneka, they got shot down, but they're resilient, and they're still trying to work at other ways in order to end this. And I would just like to recite the Inafresi, because I feel like that is what everybody needs to remember. So, Gini mas takulong, gi corazonhu, I mas takulong. Oh no, sorry. Gini mas takulong, gi hinasoku, I mas takulong, gi corazonhu. Zani mas figu, nani na senyahu, hu ofrece mais sadzu, para bai protehi, zanhu defendi, I hinengi, I cultura, I lenguaje, I aire, I hanum zanitano tamoro. Niren shaku daretsu gineazuus tata. Estihu efitma gihilui Biblia, zani banderahu I bandera guahan. And I would like to really shed light on, I offer myself to protect and defend the beliefs, the culture, the language, the air, the water, and the land of the Tamoru, which our inherited God-given rights. For our beliefs, we are currently standing up for our beliefs, our culture. This is our culture. Our culture is getting threatened due to the face of mass production, of globalization, of modernization, of just human consumption. Our language is diminishing, and if we keep, I just believe, if this is my subjective opinion, if we keep allowing these atrocities to happen, our culture, our language, our beliefs are going to die, along with our atmosphere, the carbon dioxide or the oxygen we inhale, and then our fresh water source. Carbon dioxide, or our carbon dioxide best friends are our trees that are right outside. If they keep exploding and just demolishing our land, clearing it out, we're gonna have a mass output of carbon dioxide. And what are we gonna rely on? We can't have technology. Technology cannot save us. 15 or 1,000 years ago, they didn't have technology. They lived off the land. And Auntie Bobby's, even Maneka read it, how she said her and her husband live off the land. How are our Tau going to live off the land if they have the soil is contaminated? How are the pescadores going to fish for the guihan if it's contaminated, and when they sell it, it's gonna infect everybody. It's a ripple effect, how I see it. If one, just think about it as the open bomb detonation. The smoke goes up, it disappears, but it's not really there. It gets absorbed inside the soil, you know what I mean, gets absorbed into the ocean, gets absorbed into our aquifer, and it doesn't stay there. It'll be there for thousands of years. So as a future generation, I believe we should deny this permit. This permit shouldn't resurface again. And I think it's mind-boggling how this is even happening right now. But with resilience and power to the people, I believe that we will win this again, and this will forever be denied. Sizos Masi.
Sizos Masi Taylor, thank you so much. Now I'd like to call Caitlin.
Sizos Masi, Senator Sabina, Senator Telu. Thank you for always showing up to these things when other senators are not able to for whatever reason. I shared before how, I'm a Chamali Palauan, daughter of Guahan, and I shared before how it's just really sad to see how much environmental damage has happened on Guam, whereas in Palau, due to the fact that they are independent, not colonized, and they maintain their culture where the women elders have choice even in politics. Like the women elders would choose who is the head chief of police, who works to protect the environment, and they watch them from the time they're young till they're old. And so we end up having good people in the government over there who do what's right because of this tradition that has been carried on for thousands of years in this matriarchal society, which Guam doesn't have anymore because of 400 years of colonization. And I want to support this bill 360-36. And I'm just really proud of everyone who is in support of this, and for you for continuing to stand to protect our island and all that is sacred. I am a mother of 4 children, and as I mentioned before in the other hearing, I wish I could go back to Palau and live there, but because of my joint custody situation, I am stuck here. And sometimes I'm just like, man, this, it's easy to see why so many people leave here. The poverty has risen, which is also directly related to this colonization. In fact, the military admits themselves in their SCIS that not only are they causing more damage to our environment, but they are going to cause a rise in poverty. Like with the inflation, more landlords are accommodating military and people with more money, and they've been raising the prices of rent. And I had to apply for shelter at one point when leaving an abusive relationship. Thankfully, family was able to help me, but not so many people are here privileged. A lot of people are leaving our island. There is gentrification happening because of this military buildup. And our water, our soil, our air the contamination is also rising. This open burn pit, obviously, like there's no way that this should happen. I can't believe we have to do this and stand against it. But I also want to encourage people to not just oppose this, but to stand for the decolonization of our island, because that is really the only way we're going to be able to stop these things from continuing to happen. And I know there's some people that prefer statehood over independence, but if you just look at Hawaii, look at what has happened to them, look at how the military poisoned their water with jet fuel, and children have been drinking that water. They didn't even let the people know, and they still have not shut it down. It's crazy. This is terrorism. The people that are oppressing us, or at least me, and it's not people in Iraq and the terrorists that we're told, that our people have to go and fight. It's the terrorists are right here. Anyways, it's just, I'm really grateful for everyone who has come to stand and support, and thank you. Just want to say thank you so much again. I mentioned before how in Palau we had activists like Gabriela Ngirmang, who was a farmer, grandmother, an old lady actually, who had to go to court, gathered a group of older women to fight the military who wanted to dump nuclear weapons in Palau, and they're like, no, we depend on our land. They don't got food stamps in Palau, but they live off the land, and there's no homeless people in Palau. You will not starve if you go to Palau, and they take care of their land. And so these women, they gathered all the other elder women who go in the taro patch, my aunties, some of them are my aunties, and they went against the U.S. and they filed a lawsuit. But the day before they went to court, Gabriela Ngirmang, the leader of this organization, her house was firebombed. And eventually another one of their leaders, activists, was shot and killed. So I come from a place of warriors who still to this day are warriors and really defend the land and water there and live off the land and water. And I want that so much for Guam. And I'm so proud of the people who continue to do that, because, Palau is a very beautiful place. Like I said, people can still live off their land. There's no homeless people there. You go there, you're taken care of. It's very sad to see how many homeless people are here, even veterans that are homeless, veterans that are not being taken care of like this, veterans that were poisoned by the chemicals. And Dr. Hope Christoval even shared one time when I listened to her give a speech above the Texan, about how, how the military says that the brown tree snakes are the main cause of the loss of birds. Well, according to her and other scientists, Dr. Louise, I forgot his last name, but that's actually not true. I know that sounds crazy to say, but according to them, she chairs the Northern Guam Soil Water Conservation. Yes, the military did bring the brown tree snakes, but that came after the Agent Orange and DDT that was sprayed all over our island, and that is when our native birds started dying, and people started getting sick, and people started dying. And in Palau, we have brown tree snakes. We got our birds. So I can see how this is true. And there are scientists that worked for the UOG that did research on all the toxic contamination sites all over the island, and they wanted this to be presented to the public. And it was withheld from the public. And instead of telling the public, all this information that these professors and scientists have gathered over the years, over 3,000 studies, I believe, were done. Instead of doing that, it says, instead of informing their own students, more than 3,000, their families, and the community how to prevent and treat constant accumulation of these deadly poisons in their bodies, UOG published an editorial in the newspaper and Variety, denying any contamination of food they eat and the water they drink. And this is from Dr. Louise Sizefres, Szyfres, MD, MPH, I don't know how to pronounce that name, but over 3,000 studies done all over the island. And this information has not been given to us. How is it that, our kids can be hammered with COVID information all day, every day at school, but they're not, we don't tell them about the other things that are affecting our health? I believe that the Guam Public Health should be informing the public about all of these toxins. I believe that schools should be informing the children about all of these things, and that it should not be kept from the public, because these things are affecting us, and as Monica explained, it has already killed like a lot of our people. So yeah, that's all I want to say, and thank you so much again for doing this, and Caesar Smasi.
Masi, Caitlin, for your testimony. Thank you for being here. Next, we have Luke Davis. You're recognized.
Hafide, Nahusi Luke Davis. I'm here to express my full support for Bill 36036 to prohibit open burning, open detonation, and the transshipment of hazardous waste on and into Guam. Much appreciation to Senator Perez and Senator Taidagui. Just want to echo the others. We really wish we had more senators here. But thank you so much for introducing this timely and significant measure. Additionally, I would like to acknowledge the Chamorro people whose homeland I care for, reside on, and appreciate. Furthermore, non-native inhabitants, settlers of colonizing nations like myself, have a responsibility to the people and environment in which we reside. This testimony serves as a small part to fulfill this duty. Along with continued land condemnation and occupation, deliberate destruction of ancestral sites, and habitat for native flora and fauna, the practice of open burning and open detonation by the military of the United States is yet another example of their blatant disregard and disrespect for Chamorro land, Chamorro history, and the health of all who call Guam home. Would America allow open burning and open detonation in Arlington National Cemetery or Yosemite National Park? During US President Biden's most recent State of the Union address in March of this year, he directly called attention to the use of open burning and open detonation when he stated, quote, "Our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan have faced many dangers. One was stationed at bases and breathing in toxic smoke from burn pits. That incinerated waste of war, medical and hazard material, jet fuel, and more. When they came home, many of the world's fittest and best trained warriors were never the same. Headaches, numbness, dizziness, a cancer that would put them in a flag-draped coffin. I know. One of those soldiers was my son, Major Beau Biden," end quote. What the US president failed to acknowledge was that open burning and open detonation is not just affecting soldiers in distant lands, but that this practice continues in the American nation and its colonies, and that civilians surrounding military bases are just as susceptible to contamination of the air, water, and land. Why are the rates of cancer continuing to rise on Guam and in other communities that surround military bases, when the rates for these same diseases are falling in the United States? History teaches us that the military of the United States cannot be trusted or believed, including government contractors. Remember, despite the evidence and testimony from military veterans, the Department of Defense denied that Agent Orange was used on Guam. They've since rescinded that and acknowledged and afforded compensation to those veterans. Also remember that despite the evidence and testimony from military veterans and dependents, the Department of Defense stated that the groundwater in and around Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, was safe to drink, cook with, and bathe in. And then obviously they rescinded that as well after decades of denials. Remember, the Department of Defense promised the Marshallese of Bikini and Eniwetok that they would be able to quickly return home. And that's obviously never been the case. These are just a very few, a drop in the bucket of all of the empty promises, lies that the U.S. military, the Department of Defense, and associated contractors have made over the years. Today, the Department of Defense is telling the people of Guam that there is no better method, no other technology, no safer way to dispose of hazardous waste than to burn it or blow it up over the Northern Lens Aquifer. Can we trust them? Lastly, as other open burn and open detonation sites are likely to be closed down, as mentioned by President Biden, there's a federal focus on these sites, especially with his son, that it could have potentially caused the death of his son from undisclosed brain cancer. What is to stop the Department of Defense from shipping tons of hazardous waste from other localities to be disposed of on Guam? And I really took offense to, I'm sad that he left, I really took offense to Mr. Moore's comments about the neighboring islands. I think the neighboring islands would actually understand that Guam has been the dump site, the fueling station, the storage site for decades. And I think the other islands would understand, and I feel like there are all other alternatives for transshipment to other places, and that Guam doesn't need to be sacrificed forevermore. Senators, I urge you to vote in favor of Bill 36036 to prohibit open burning, open detonation, and the transshipment of hazardous waste on and into Guam. Mrs. Usmasi, thank you.
Mrs. Usmasi, Luke, thank you for being here. Next we have Callan. You're recognized.
Oh, thanks. I've asked for a photo of my dad to be shown during my testimony. My father, the late Colonel Dr. W. Chris Perez, was a state surgeon for the Guam Army National Guard at the time of his death in 2015. He was deployed to Iraq in the spring of 2009 for 4 months, and although he was exempt from physical training as an officer, he ran with his troops every morning for their morale. He told me that at his base, Joint Base Balad, it was standard practice for the military to use open pit burning for waste and trash collected at the base. When I asked him what kinds of things were thrown into these pits for burning, he reported everything from tires to human fecal matter, and he described the smoke as the darkest, thickest, most foul-smelling thing he's ever seen or smelled. In December 2013, my dad was diagnosed with non-small cell lung cancer, the disease that eventually took his life less than 2 years later. He had a history of asthma since childhood, so it could be the combination of his pre-existing diminished lung capacity as well as his exposure to that chronic open burn practice that caused his cancer. But I'll probably never know for certain if my dad's deployment near open burn pits caused his eventual death, but as a lifelong medical professional, he told me about a month before his death that if the military ever offered me compensation, to not let my pride get in the way and to take the money. I think deep down he knew it had to be related. My dad was a relatively healthy man before he joined the Army in 2006. He was never a smoker. I'm writing this anecdotal account of his disease because even if the open burning didn't cause his lung cancer, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs has written me multiple times asking if my dad was of service near their bases because they have linked several cancers of service members to their deployment. Sometimes it would be my dad's base that was included, but not his specific cancer. Sometimes it would be his cancer, but not his base. To date, I have never received compensation from the military for my dad's disease, but even if I did, I would trade any amount of monetary compensation to have him still healthy on this earth. I'm writing in support of this bill so that no more of our island's people need to deal with diseases caused by open burn and open detonation practices. These outdated practices have been proven harmful by scientific data, and it's a shame that the military would even allow them to continue. That concludes my written testimony, but I just want to say thank you to Senator Perez for bringing this bill forward, for writing it, and for continuing to champion these causes. And thank you, Senator Taitigui, for being here today. I'll just speak for myself when I'll say that I'm really tired of sitting in this building and talking about these issues, you know. We've been protesting this for so many years. My dad's been dead for 7 years, and the military keeps taking from us, even though we say that we don't want these things to continue, you know. To those that say it's unpatriotic to be here and talking about this, I tell them that my dad, who was a colonel, super proud to be in the Army, was a member of PARS, you know, because he realized that when you hold someone in high esteem, like the military, you have to hold them accountable for their actions. And, you know, like Luke was saying about what Mr. Moore testified about earlier, about our brothers and sisters in the surrounding islands needing to dispose of their waste, you know, I think it's interesting that he uses that as an example of how the military can be responsible when we can look at the Marshall Islands and see that it's probably one of the most prime examples of how the military was really destructive and careless in the Pacific, you know. Those islands will be radioactive for hundreds of years from now. And they don't have a good track record of disposing things properly, of conducting themselves respectfully in foreign lands. And I just am so glad to be here to support this bill today, even though I had to leave work early and I'm late to pick up my kids. You know, I feel like this is something that would make my dad proud, so thank you.
Situazamasi Callan, thank you so much. Next on our list is Kiana Tuncap. She's here. Kyle Dahilik. Oh, okay, yes, you're recognized, Kyle.
Buenas and Hafide, Senadora Perez, Zan Senadora Tairagri, in Anhu Si Kyle Dahilig. I am in my final year at the University of Guam and served as the Guam Youth Congress Chair for the Committee on Environment, Utilities, and Transportation. During my service in the Guam Youth Congress, I developed skills to identify challenges our community faces and to collaborate on solutions for the betterment of our community. Core to my time in the Guam Youth Congress, I worked to center conversations surrounding environmental protection and justice. I learned that as part of the progress to a better and brighter future, we must root ourselves in the protection of our environment and the well-being of our people. As we continue our shared interests in protecting and preserving our lands, air, and waters, it is imperative that we ground ourselves not just in the physical environment, but the cultural and societal implications that allowing open burning and open detonation practices have on contaminating our stories about our environment and people. By leveraging tools and technology to better dispose of these harmful waste, we continue to advance our work in moving Guam towards sustainability and prosperity. And with the passage of this bill, the Guam EPA is granted a stronger mandate to enforce their mission and protect our environment. And Donklu na Sujus Masi, maraming salamat po, Inkiniso.
Situazamasi Kyle, thank you. Last on the list, we have Robert Celestial. Okay. You may proceed. Thank you for being here.
Hafide, buenas. Senator Perez, Senator Tairagri. My name is Robert Celestial. I'm a retired sergeant from the United States Army. I'm a disabled American veteran. I was stationed in Inuit Atoll in 1977 to 1978, cleaning up the nuclear waste and helped build that dome out there that was highly contaminated even to today. I am excited because 20-some years ago, this wouldn't be possible. Because 20-some years ago, I brought up an issue called radiation fallout Guam and how the people were exposed to nuclear fallout. And even our government and some of their government leaders didn't believe what my 4-page report would bring. And even with the Agent Orange, when we came before this legislature, or the past legislature, about Agent Orange on Guam, and to form the Right to Know Commission that died afterwards. But today I testify and I am in support of this bill, 360-16. It's a good bill. It's going to help the people of Guam because it's prevention, not like before. In 1994, it was declassified that Guam was exposed to nuclear fallout. And then later on, Agent Orange, which the young man over there explained that nobody would believe that they had Agent Orange on Guam and how the people of Guam were suffering from Agent Orange. But the Honor Pact Act was passed in August of this year. The Honor Pact Act is to compensate thousands of veterans who were exposed to burn pits. And also my comrades, the Inuit cleanup veterans and Agent Orange here on Guam. The people of Guam have been exposed to so many toxins. It's unbelievable. And I've experienced, not only for myself, but watching other people in my group called the Pacific Association of Radiation Survivors. I've lost a lot of members to cancers and other diseases, and I'm hoping and praying that this bill will continue to prevent exposure for our people, and not only our people, but the military. And I'd like to recommend senators that you propose a resolution to Congress to include Guam in the Honor Pact Act, because we have a burn pit here. And the military personnel were exposed to burn pits here in Guam, and also the people of Guam been exposed to burn pits in the past. So that's my recommendation for now, is that if possible, you could introduce another resolution to Congress, and hopefully next year they'll introduce a bill to include Guam in the Honor Pact Act. And that will help Congress understand that they need to discontinue burn pits, especially here in Guam. If they're going to compensate thousands and thousands of veterans who were exposed to burn pits, then this doesn't make any sense to try and pass a license to continue burn pits here in Guam. It doesn't make any sense. To me, it's ludicrous, because I'm a veteran, I'm a disabled vet. I served my country, I went there, got exposed, then I've been compensated. So that's the same thing that needs to be done here in Guam, is that the veterans that were actually doing the burn pits here in Guam needs to be included in the Honor Pact Act, and the people of Guam needs to be compensated too, if possible. So I want to thank you. I want to thank the groups that have been pushing this for many, many years. It's been a hard fight, and I'm just so proud of them, is because in the beginning, 20-some years ago, like I said, nothing like this would ever come to fruition. So thank you, and God bless.
Let's do Masi, Robert, for being here, and thank you for your testimony. Just for the record, the legislature did include in the resolution in support of the PACT Act to include Guam, but it never made it into the bill, in the bill that was signed by President Biden. So yes, that would definitely be something that we can push forward. Yeah, thank you. So I just want to thank everybody that has come here today, and I just want to also put on the record, there's been a lot of mention that, you know, it's safety versus protection of our environment and the health of our people. And I think I just want to put on the record that the latest report in 2019 clearly identifies there are safe modes of treatment that does not include OBOD. And in fact, even it addresses the propellants. There are technologies that address a lot of these propellants that are found in the OBOD sites that have been abandoned. HMX, RDX, TNT, DNTs, nitrobenzenes, and so forth. So there is technology that is safely implemented. In fact, it is currently being implemented in other communities across the United States that have been approved by the Department of Defense. And so this report does highlight those alternatives. And so the question is, what is the truth to hold on to OBOD? You know, what is the real truth? And so if you look at that report, it kind of says what are the reasons, the other reasons besides safety and the health of our people and environment. Cost is one consideration. Funding, throughput capacity, capability. So these are other factors that are used in denying the ban of OBOD. And it's really important at this time. So in the 1980s, Congress knew that this was harmful to the communities, left one exemption open. But moving forward, now we have information that's been tested and vetted and now being implemented. And so what is the truth to why we're holding on to OBOD? And to also, I want to put on the record, this report states, so the DoD's demilitarization program, which is required to reduce the stockpile of excess, obsolete, unserviceable munitions, is the main user by weight of OBOD. Use of OBOD as a demilitarization treatment method has declined from an estimated 80% in the mid-1980s to an average of 30% in recent years. And this report also states that 41 facilities, so of the 225, 41 facilities are DoD. from a Department of Defense. And so there are alternatives that have been highlighted that can address many of these things that are currently being used on Guam. I also want to state for the record that in the news it was reported that OBOD is needed to treat legacy weapons. But in a FOIA that I received, the US military wants to use it for the ammunition that's being expended on the firing range. And I can quote, "The Milcon P735 machine gun range plans to dispose the ordnances using open burn operations." So although they tell us it has not been in operation since 2002, they have plans to use it to destroy the waste that are going to be expended. So we heard in the many previous testimonies and public hearings, and even in the SCIS put out by the military, 6.7 million bullets expended every year are going to be now planned to be open burned. And they also go on because cost purposes. So this is really the reason why they want to hold on to OBOD. It's cost. It's not the health of our people. It's not the health of our environment. It's what it's going to cost them. The military has the biggest budget. The US military has the biggest budget of the 7 nations under it combined. And so we also know that the cost of cleanup is staggering. And there has also been mentioned in this report that the cost of cleanup could be considerably less than the cost of implementing these alternatives. And we all know people in our families that have cancer and are struggling to receive treatment, to pay for their treatment. They have to go off island. And so what is the real reason we are holding on to OBOD? Is it for our community? Is it for our families? Is it for our own selves? Because it will affect us. So you saw in the footage the plumes that was traveling, dispersing. And this has been going on since the 1980s. So there is no mention of cumulative impacts. And in the latest permit, there's no true environmental performance standards. And in the OBOD informational hearing, there was minimal monitoring. And it was an basically there was based on an honor policy. There was very little, if I recall, no actual monitoring. It was based on an honor policy that the military was providing the information. And our community is demanding more. And in fact, the latest memorandum states, US EPA guidance states that EPA is committed to improving the health of communities and advancing equity and environmental protections, and working in collaboration with our state and territorial partners. It is important to engage with communities so that they can effectively participate in the permitting process and can fully consider and address the issues that impact the community health. And it's important to incorporate the valuable information ideas that improve the quality of agency decisions and to ensure protectiveness and transparency. More importantly, the RCRA permits issued must be designed to protect human health and the environment, and it must include a multitude of controls. So it goes on to say that EPA encourages our local agency to take into consideration the community's concerns and increase transparency, and that's what we have not seen. We don't know what the decisions are being made on behalf of the community. And so therefore we have this distrust. And just seeing this document that they plan to use open burning for the weapons that they're going to expend that's to come. So really, we need to prioritize the health of our people. And the passage of the PACT Act even shows the list of diseases that are associated with, so these are presumptive diseases. So veterans that have been exposed to open burn, open detonation, unfortunately, my condolences to Callan, her dad, who was part of PARS, in fact, is one of the founding members of PARS. And so a lot of these diseases were not recognized by the US government until the signage of the PACT Act. And before that, they had to go through a lot of trouble just to get recognized, to get treatment. A whole list of cancers: brain cancer, gastrointestinal cancer of any type, glioblastoma, head cancer of any type, kidney cancer, lymphatic cancer, lymphoma, melanoma, neck cancer of any type, pancreatic cancer, reproductive cancer of any type, respiratory cancer of any type. Other things: asthma, chronic bronchitis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, chronic rhinitis, chronic sinusitis, constrictive bronchiolitis, obliterative bronchiolitis, emphysema, granulomatous disease, interstitial lung disease, pleuritis, pulmonary fibrosis, sarcoidosis. So there's a longer list than this, but this is just some of the things that we're putting our community at risk. And so this is, I just want to thank the community for coming out and saying what we've been saying all along. We do not, enough is enough. We need to protect ourselves, our health, our environment. That is what is critical. That is what is important to us. Senator Tydek, do you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and you touched on many of the questions I had and answered them. You're very well versed in this situation, and I think since last year when they had it in the media, and there are comments that were made, the concern is, what do we do with these World War II ordinances that we find? So I'm going to ask EPA, what is the circumstances right now if you were called in and saying they found an ordinance in Mong Mong? I know there's been a couple of them. What is the process when that happens?
Good afternoon.
Just state your name and who you are for the record.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator Tydek. My name is Michelle Lastimosa. I'm the Deputy Administrator for Guam EPA. And to answer that question, so anytime an unexploded ordinance is found, usually 911 is called. And then through that activation, usually EOD or other first responder personnel are activated to the scene. But to answer your question, what happens if this bill passes and it prohibits OBOD on Guam?
Wait, first, before you go, because you just called everybody except EPA. Does EPA get called to the scene as well?
No, we are not first responders. We are support. If they do need us, we will be activated through our emergency response number if they feel we need to be there. But we are not the first responders to an unexploded ordinance.
So the process is that the EPA administrator is notified, and they'll make a determination whether the unexploded ordnance is either blown in place or if it's such a size that cannot be detonated in place due to proximity to buildings, people, and other things like that. Then generally it's taken to the OBOD pit, and under emergency permit, which is what they call, the UXO will be exploded.
Where?
At the OBOD.
Okay, on military base?
On military base.
Do you have jurisdiction on what happens on the military base?
So when it comes to unexploded ordnance, it's deemed so volatile, and that there's no permit needed for that because the munitions of concern are basically 50 years old, and they're so unstable, they are blown under what's called an emergency permit, and that's allowed under RCRA.
When you say that, is that allowable under EPA or is that allowable
Under RCRA, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act.
Which is federal, correct?
Which is federal, which we have adopted the regulations through...
EPA?
Yes. We've
Okay,
adopted
super.
the regulations, and we have primacy on Guam for the OBOD regulations.
There was a newspaper article last year, and some of the comments that Senator Perez was talking about in there, it said that it was opened in 1980, and then the last time it was used was 2002?
That's the open burn part of the thing. So they have not used the open burn pit. And my staff can correct me if I'm wrong. They're more of the subject matter experts. It was either in 2002 or 1997. It's what I recall that the open burn was used.
The last time?
Yes.
Okay. From that time, do you do regular checks, like checking the environment, the water, the groundwater, for any kind of contaminants since that time?
Yes, and so what was the last study we did was the seep study. As you can see, she pointed out the seeps that were there on the site. Due to the proximity of the ocean, there's no way to do groundwater monitoring on the beach itself because the water lens table is so close. So what we do is there are upgradient wells that are sampled, and they're compared to the sampling at the seeps. And so far, we've found no exceedances of any of the contaminants of concern at the OBOD.
Is there any opportunity to do more of an environmental impact with regards to that area, or not just groundwater, but we saw the smoke that.
So that smoke there, we spoke with them. That was a training flare. That was why it was pink smoke.
That's why it was pink. Okay.
Right. So they have training operations in that area. They'll put the smoke up, and then
Is that toxic?
No, it's an inert
pink smoke.
It's an inert smoke. It's like you have a smoke bomb, like that type of smoke.
Yeah.
It's just basically
I see.
a colorant that's put into the propellant that it is, and then it's set off.
So my next question is, if this bill were to pass, right, and it doesn't allow any kind of burning, can the federal government still do it without your permission?
Those are legal issues that we would have to go into because I can't speak to national security in that matter in regards to that. We do regulate the OBOD in the strictest sense possible, and as our testimony said earlier, we don't allow the burning of any hazardous waste that's not part of that sector of waste that are allowed to be burned because there's no other alternative technologies. We are currently, and as part of the permit process, requiring them to do an alternate technology study, and that's not been completed for the munitions of concern that are up there right now. They're working on that, and we did send out a memo to them. They responded to us, and we are in the process of conducting that alternative technology analysis.
As well as, I'm glad you put in here the Hodgkinson, the Carolyn, Director of the Office of Resources and the comments that you made with regards to the latest technology and what they're looking into, and asking, as well as EPA to continue to look further into evaluating alternatives,
Right,
that's less evasive.
Right, and as part of our permitting process, and as we stated in our testimony, it's not just done during the permitting process. If there's a technology that becomes available for that type of munition of concern, then they have to do an assertion. So it's not just once a year or once every time they do the permit. It's any time that technology becomes available, they have to do that analysis.
And they would have to get approved. Okay, so let's say something comes up, right? That's a lot safer for our environment, new technology, and they want to burn something in that area. They would have to come to you, and would you require that they use this new type of technology that's cleaner for the air and the environment?
If it's been approved as the available technology for that type of munition of concern, then yes, they would have to use the latest technology.
Okay, that's good to hear, but I think, did you want to say something?
If I may.
Sure, go ahead. Oh, wait, I really need you to look into the legality on the military base. Even if we were to pass this legislation, can they still do that on base? So if you can look into that on a legal perspective.
We would forward that to our legal counsel. And,
Region 9 would?
Well, our legal counsel here on Guam and their
Okay.
legal counsel, the military,
Okay.
and US EPA, Region 9.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Gutierrez. Please go ahead.
Well, first, Senator, your question about that pink smoke, if it was toxic, military officials released a public statement that those were M18 grenades, smoke grenades, and that is actually on their permit application for disposal for toxic waste, for open burn and open detonation. It is listed as a hazardous waste that they want to dispose of on their own permit application.
Before you go into that, you want to respond to that, Mr. Gutierrez?
Well, according to the information that we received, that was a training grenade. It may be part of their permit application for disposal of those type of stuff when I guess they're expired. But that day that in question, and we had a meeting with them, it was part of a training exercise, the smoke from that grenade.
Okay. Please, Monica, guys.
So that might have been one isolated incident of a M18 smoke grenade, but it's on their permit application for a reason, because they want to do it in bigger quantities and more regularly. And as it was discussed earlier, we can't think of these things as one-time exposure, but as our whole lifetimes, our entire lifetime, we're exposed, and these chemicals build up in concentration in the environment over time. And they're also called forever chemicals, so they don't break down and they travel, throughout the groundwater and everything like that. Gosh, there was also one more point I wanted to make, but it's escaped me. It's our understanding that if this was to become Guam law, because it impacts the law, which informs the ways that Guam carries out RCRA, that it would have impact on the way that the military carries out open burning, open detonation, because they have to follow RCRA. So I think, we've spoken to a few attorneys, and it sounds promising. We believe that it could impact. This local law can stop the military from doing open burn, open detonation.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And thank you, TPA. I'm looking forward to getting some more answers from you on regards to the questions I had. And of course, Robert, thank you so much for all your hard work and your continued fight for someone like me who's a recovering cancer survivor. And I'm part of your group, actually, and appreciate all the hard work that you're doing. And I asked Senator Perez to have me as first co-sponsor on the PAC. So on your
Thank
PAC.
you so much.
Thank you for all your hard work.
If this might help, in 1990, they opened JCATS in Johnson Island. Are you guys familiar with that?
Say again.
JCATS. It's called JCATS. It's Johnson Island Chemical Disposal System. They opened up a huge incinerator. They opened up in 1990, closed in 2000. They incinerated all sorts of munitions. And so, if possible, they could still open that up. It's still there. So, it's a suggestion.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you, Senator Tadigui. Deputy Lastimosa, did you want to say something?
I did have one comment that was brought to my attention from other stakeholders, and that is, if this bill passes, how will GovGuam address the emergency disposal of these, waste munitions, should, one be found. And certainly on Guam, it has been reported that a 1,500-pound undetonated bomb has been found on Guam. So if there is no alternative, and while there are alternatives, if there is no available alternative at that time, how will we address it? So there's a real safety issue. So that's something that I just wanted to comment on and was brought to my attention and wanted to bring forth.
Okay, Senator Tadigui.
Thank you. I just have a quick follow-up, and that's why I brought it up. What is the procedure when something like that happens? I mean, we can't go and store it in, some kind of area or bomb shelter. I mean, we'll fill that up, and then that becomes worse. So we do have to find some way, and I think with the technology today, getting better, and protecting us and the environment is is there. So we need to do our job and find some kind of alternative and solution for that. But no, I hear you, because I was thinking the same thing. I did have one question, though, with regards to how much, they talked about my other islands, the neighboring islands, coming here and giving us their waste. I mean, we have an issue with used oil here that now I just heard from GPA said, you know, Senator, we need to discuss how we're going to dispose of our used oil, because GPA is no longer going to be, you know, the one taking that in anymore and burning it anymore. So they're going to ultra low. So how much of waste is coming to our island from Micronesia in the last year?
I can't give you actual figures because we only, so the notification is given to us that they're going to transship to Guam. The only other places that actually store on Guam are the conforming storage facilities up at the Anderson Air Force Base. So they'll bring in their waste from Midway Island. Everything else is transshipped through Guam to the United States. And as far as I can remember, there's never been an incident of spillage or any waste while in transshipment through Guam.
But it's never landed on Guam, it stayed on the ship? Is that when you're saying?
No, well, they're brought to the port and they're transferred from one ship to another.
To another ship.
But they're generally not opened except for the ones that go to the conforming storage facilities, which come in smaller packaged in bulk, and transported to either a recycler or disposal facility in the United States.
On Guam? Off island?
Off
okay,
island.
Okay.
There's nothing
just
stays
wondering.
on Guam. It all goes through Guam.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clear that up. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Senator Tadegui. So just to be clear, so it was stated earlier that, you know, if there is a ordinance found and it has to be, detonated, that it's brought, there's no need for a permit application
It's an
for that?
emergency permit through RCRA.
It's an emergency permit.
Right, so basically it's notification, so they need to just meet the administrative requirements and notify Guam EPA that they're going to actually do the detonation. And there's, through the regulatory process, just a notification to the community and all other things that are part of the permit process that this is going to occur, the detonation.
Okay. And so I know in the permit, so does that circumvent whatever the permit application contains? Because I know there's a limit to the new, right, net explosive weights. And so if it's an emergency type of find.
If it's emergency, I believe it's exempted.
It's exempted, so it could be any amount.
Right. The last biggest one they found, like they said, was a 1,500-pound bomb at the new NANBO building across from the library. And according to the EOD personnel, if they blew that in place, it would have blown out every single window, car window, house window, and set off in the next about a quarter-mile area from that area. So the safest thing to do was to bring it to the OBOD and blow it up.
So there's, you know, to me, there's a limit, there's a finite number of
I
legacy items, right? Legacy explosives.
I mean, you're talking about legacy items that are found out here. There's a finite. Of course, one day we will find all of the bombs on Guam if we dig up every single plot of land on Guam. But until that time, there has to be some outlet for the destruction of the munitions, the unexploded ordnance.
Hi, Glenn
I see
Smith,
Glenn's coming forward. Glenn, do you want to add something?
Yes, actually, I was in emergency response at the beginning of the year, and we were called to a fire located behind the Shine Market in Ordot. So I had gotten there after the fire department had left. So me and my team, we started scouring the area because it was occupied by a homeless person accumulating a lot of solid waste. And as we were looking through the site, a foot from where the fire had occurred and fire department personnel had extinguished the fire and had left, they did not recognize an unexploded ordnance about 12 inches in length in that nearby area. So I had to call in basically EOD. We had to secure the area, and we had to basically try and get those homeless people out of that location. And according to the homeless person who's squatting in that area, there's a lot of those types of munitions that are in that swampland area in the back there. And, you know, it was very fortunate that the fire department didn't accidentally, you know, it wasn't a part of the fire because it would have went boom. And thankfully, they were able to secure it. They determined that it was safe for transport down to the detonation area, and they brought it down to have it controlled det.
Okay, so, okay, all right, thank you. I'm glad it didn't explode. Deputy Lastimosa, so I know there's a meeting coming up for the rulemaking. So currently the US EPA is looking at the OBOD in light of the alternatives. In your study of the alternatives, have you, well, first of all, have you been able to look at the alternatives closely?
I have not.
Okay.
At this point, no.
All right. And I think that's, yeah, I think it's very important that, you know, this is something that the community too needs to be engaged with. It's not just the decisions by the agencies. I think a lot of this information should be coming out, and especially when we're talking about constituents, munition constituents of concern, that, you know, already there's been documentation of alternatives for these chemicals and munitions, and I think it's really important that, you know, there has to be some level of transparency between, you know, DOD and, you know, the community here,
right?
Because we are subjects of toxic exposure, or we have been subjects of toxic exposure, and, you know, considering that technology has advanced, yeah, I think it's really critical that we use everything in our power to protect our community.
Right. I do know that part of the discussion that we've had with DOD is that, you know, their safety board determines, you know, what alternatives or method of disposal or treatment that they're going to use based on the safety and health of their personnel, right? So like Roland and Glenn had mentioned, it's whether or not, you know, that waste munition can be safely handled. You know, we're talking about 60-year-old bombs that are unstable. We don't know how they're going to react. We don't know, you know, what's going to happen if they're, you know, handled a certain way, if they hit a little bump along the way, or, you know, so they're going to determine the safest method of disposal, not only just for that bomb and for the community that surrounds that bomb, but for their personnel. We certainly, you know, don't want our service members blowing up, you know, for the sake of, you know, let's blow it in place and not have an alternative to take it to a OBOD facility, right? So, you know, if this is completely prohibited, will DOD even respond? You know, I mean, if they're not using, you know, their facility where they can control those detonations and treatment of that munitions, will they even respond? So then it'll fall on our emergency response personnel, our firefighters, our policemen, our, you know, Guam EPA's personnel, and that's certainly not a risk I know that I'm not willing to take for my personnel who aren't trained as you know, detonation specialists. So, you know, I will certainly, you know, the onus is on DOD to reevaluate and evaluate those alternative technology. And again, you're right, it's cost, you know, but it's their cost. We certainly cannot dictate to them how they're going to spend their money and whether or not they will or will not spend that money on alternative options. So even if we're talking about alternative options, if they're unwilling to do it and we have no other method of disposal, we really are doing a disservice to this community by not having any option at all for waste munitions disposal. And, you know, we, as Guam EPA, we are going to enforce the laws that are given to us by authority. You know, if you tell us that it's prohibited, that's what we're going to follow, as we are a regulatory agency. So we're not going to, Certainly not going to overextend our authority. If that's the law that you pass, that's what we will enforce. Right now, given the authority under RCRA C, the primacy that we're given under our HAZWAS rules and regs and our the law, it is given that exemption. It's as a miscellaneous unit under subpart X, under RCRA C. So if it's allowed, we are allowed to permit it because it's given that exemption, then we're going to allow for that exemption if they're requesting for that exemption. Now, if it's prohibited by local law, then that's what will follow. We're not going to overstep our authority if it passes. But as it is right now, it is an exemption. We are allowed to permit it. We are, like Roland said, implementing the most stringent conditions. And in terms of over the 30-year course of this permit being valid, there's always been open discussion or that opportunity for open discussion with the public through the public hearings, through the public comment period, response time. And certainly this is no different. At this time, the public hearing or the public comment period has lapsed because there was no public comment during the public comment period. But if we are able to reopen it, if you want us or the public deems that there's a compromise and we can restrict or limit or have more stringent conditions in the permit, then that's something that we can revisit. But we have been transparent. There's always been that opportunity. We certainly have not excluded the citizens of Guam from participating in this permit process in any way, shape, or form.
Can I just add a caveat to that, and it's that when we do take comments into concern in regards to making changes to the permit or modifying the permit in regards to what is allowed in the law, it has to be based on scientific fact, and the scientific fact has to be backed by what do you call that, justification and then studies, and to show that whatever needs to be changed is in line with the law and in line with current technology. The not in my backyard does not work, when it comes to regulatory authority and regulatory amendments and regulatory exemptions. We follow the law according to the strictest sense that we can, according to the powers that are given to us through these statutes and regulations. So we never take anything not into the most consideration to make sure that we protect human health and the environment. So you can be assured, our agency, our deputy, our administrator, and all the staff has the best interest. We're all from Guam, so we have the best interests of the people, but we can only act within the confines of the law.
Sorry, I just wanted to, Monica, you wanted to say something?
Yes, if I could, I just want to make a note that it's not just the responsibility of Guam EPA to engage the community. It's not just their obligation to engage the community about something as serious and as destructive as open burning and open detonation. It's actually by law required by the military, the institution applying for the permit. And yes, there was a public comment period, but there was no public outreach, no effort, as required by law, that the military engaged the community about this permit application, both in violation of RCRA and NEPA. But then what GIPA could do is then say that, then hold the military accountable for not following the law. That is within their authority. That is within their authority to say, you're not following RCRA, you're not following NEPA, and you're not following the memo from June of this year. And if they're being very stringent, that's actually wonderful to hear. That's great to hear. But we actually don't know about it. So our group has actually made several requests for meetings that have gone unanswered so that we could also get some information too. And so it's not just Guam EPA's responsibility to engage the community. It's actually by law the military's responsibility, and they failed to do it. They failed to follow the laws They failed to follow RCRA and NEPA. And so now, GIPA has the authority to act. And, you know, we respectfully and humbly request that they do not fail us and the future generations of Guam. Sizos Masi.
Okay, so I'm also looking at the guidance, right? The memo that came out on June 7, 2022. And so community participation is not just limited to public comment periods. And so what they recommend to engage the public is public notification plan. So has that been created by Guam EPA, a public notification plan?
So we followed everything that's in current law. If you want to put more into the law, then you can put more into the law. But by law...
So is that a no? That's a no?
Is it required by...
So you're saying there hasn't been public notification plan?
I think what Roland's trying to say is that we have met all of the public notification requirements as per the law.
Okay.
I mean, certainly we can do more but, you know, if like we've said, you know, we are bound by the law. If the law says, you know, we're going to give, you know, a newspaper ad in a major publication, 10 days before the public hearing, then that's what we'll do.
So,
I mean, we all have...
The question was public notification plan. Does that exist?
So is that
Yes-
a recommendation
yes or no?
in the memo that just came out?
A plan. Is there a plan to notify public? Yes or no?
Well, first I have to understand the question and the context of the
Is there
question.
a public notification plan
As
that
required
Guam
by-
that Guam EPA has to notify the public about open burn, open detonation? Is there a plan that exists?
I don't understand the question.
Okay,
Is there a plan
that sounds like a no. And as far, so some of the guidance that they provided was the community participation. So they recommended advisory boards, advance notification of burn or detonation. So those are some of the things that are recommended by US EPA in the latest memo guidance.
Which
and
came
so
out.
we were talking about, you know, if we want to, you know, protect our community, the information has to be out there as well. So that's some of the things. I think I highly recommend that, this memo be, you know, looked at closely, and in order to engage our community, because that's, it's really the health. It's, you know, the health of our community and environments. It depends upon it.
So we appreciate the senator's concern and understanding. The memo came out in June of this year. Is that correct? Yeah, June 7th. So I mean, it's June, July, August, September, October, November. We've only had a few months to digest the information, and those are the recommendations. And we will surely look into providing more public participation in the future, and we will look into the memo and the recommendations and follow suit.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Are there anyone else that would like to provide testimony? Just a reminder, the committee will continue to receive written testimony until 4 p.m. Thursday, December 1st, 2022. Please address all testimony to Senator Sabina Flores Perez, Chairperson of the Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor, Procurement, Statistics, Research, and Planning, or could be dropped off at the Guam Congress Building or emailed to office@senatorperez.org. The Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor, Procurement, Statistics, Research, and Planning will now adjourn. The time is now 4:15 p.m. Sizos Masi.